And that's called backmasking. And that's what we're talking about for lore this week. So we're just jumping right into lore. So, backmasking, if you don't know, the general definition is the practice of recording backwards and then reinserting the recording into the forward mix of the song. And this really mainly applies to things with grooves like records. In today's digital world, we can, of course, flip and reverse, but it's not the same as taking a record and spinning it backwards to hear what it says. It's just not. Right. So during the 1980s, it was also thought that backmasked messages were, number one, from Satan, and number two, affecting minds on an unconscious level, causing people to worship the devil and do all sorts of evil, evil things. History of backmasking. The idea of recording things backwards goes back to the start of sound recording. Alex Case, president of the Audio Engineering Society, says that when Thomas Edison invented the wax cylinder, part of the sales pitch was to record someone speaking and then play it backwards. Phrases that sounded naughty, like the goddamn that comes if you play Mad Dog in reverse, were some of the most popular. 1913, the infamous magician in front of the pod, Aleister Crowley, said listening to phonographs reverse trained you to think backwards, and that was important for understanding the universe of magic. Creating intentional backmasking came into fashion during the 1940s when there was experimental composers like Pierre Schaeffer. Then in the 60s, we had the Beatles. They put a 30-second backward section on Rain in 1966, which was the B-side of Paperback Writer. In 1969, a radio caller started a rumor that Paul McCartney died, saying that the record Revolution 9, when played backwards, says, "Turn me on, dead man." And then soon others heard Paul is dead. Yeah. And that rumor just took off. And that also helped planted this idea of backmasking in people's minds, right? It's starting to become something that's in the popular culture. And in another case, the movie The Exorcist fucked up society. There is the scenes in The Exorcist where Reagan's messages, they don't make sense and they play them backwards. They're like, oh no, that was, that was Satan. So that contributed to the idea. That was 1973. In 1974, the Electric Light Orchestra was accused of backmasking the phrase, "He is the nasty one. Christ, you're infernal," which they deny was intentional. However, if you play the recording of Fire on High backwards, it says, "The music is reversible, but time is not. Turn back, turn back, turn back," which is very intentional. 1982, the televangelist Paul Crouch claimed that if you played Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven backwards, the line, "Bustle in your hedgerow," whatever the fuck does that even mean? Like that seems mysterious enough to me. But if you play that backwards, it says, "Here's to my sweet Satan, the one whose little path would make me sad, whose power is Satan. He will give those with him 666. There was a little tool shed where he made us suffer. Sad Satan." The band has said this is purely coincidental. And I think this is really interesting that they hear Satan being sweet and sad. William H. Yarrell, a self-described neurologist, came onto the show to tell people that rock stars were in league with the Church of Satan to put backwards messages on records. People then got together to smash and burn what they considered satanic records. This is also the year California introduced Assembly Bill 3741 to prevent backmasking that can, quote, "manipulate our behavior without our knowledge or consent and turn us into disciples of the Antichrist," unquote. This bill began when a concerned citizen called her local assemblyman, Phil Wyman, a Republican from Tehachapi, after seeing an episode of the Trinity Broadcast Network's Praise the Lord that claimed rock music contained pro-Satan hidden messages. This citizen had also heard Sweet Satan on Stairway. She took out her Zeppelin record and her husband played it backwards and they could hear it was Sweet Satan, so they knew it was true. Then they had to smash that record and they felt bad that they had to break some of their new records, but So the assemblyman was on the Committee for Consumer Protection and Toxic Materials and drafted a bill to regulate backwards messaging, which he defined as a process by which an audible verbal statement may be heard when the record is played backwards. So that's different than I feel like the other definition of it, which is just something being played backwards. This is an actual audible verbal statement that's made to be reversed. So the bill would require record manufacturers to put warning labels on any records that contain backward masking. A hearing was held on April 27th, 1982. Assemblyman Wyman argued that subliminal messaging was an invasion of one's mind and neglected to mention any studies that showed subliminal messaging was ineffective. William H. Yarrow was the only witness at the hearing. He cited his own research on how backward music is interpreted by the brain and gave a list of songs that contain backmasked satanic messages, including Revolution 9, Stairway to Heaven, and also Snowblind by Styx. In the document he presented, Rock Music, Does It Have a Secret Message? He explained, today we have a common thread of backward masking on many of the popular rock albums with the same message. Blasphemy towards Jesus Christ and calling on the listener to serve Satan as master with distinct phrases of worship to Satan. The Church of the Satan and their followers have a pact that if you perform certain things in your particular line of work, in return, Satan will give you certain favors back. And I say, who doesn't like favors? He makes up a theory explaining how the subconscious mind works, and he just makes up a lot of horseshit. So the Committee on Consumer Protection and Toxic Materials returned a decision of no vote on this bill, explaining that more research and supporting evidence on how subliminal messages affect behavior was needed. However, the publicity furthered the idea about satanic backmasking and the evils it caused. The media exacerbated the issue. Further legislation was tried across the country, including Texas. Arkansas passed a warning label bill, which was vetoed, though, by Bill Clinton, and then didn't make it back through, passed after the veto. A California House Representative, Robert Dorman, introduced the Phonograph Backward Masking Labeling Act of 1982 on the federal level. It defined backward masking as to mean an impression upon a phonograph record, which makes an audible verbal statement when the record is played backwards. So that's specific to a phonograph, too. I mean, not that they would have any forethought of what would be coming in the future, but that was very specific to that media. The bill would make it unlawful for any packager, labeler, or distributor to distribute in commerce phonograph records containing backward masking without a label bearing a specified warning. This bill did not make it past the House. Christian anti-rock activists continued to proliferate the idea that rock was filled with subliminal messaging, which could alter a person's behavior, thus explaining those who like to rock out and have sex and do drugs. And that's all because of the backmasking, I tell you. Pastors, all of it. Pastors like Gary Greenwald held seminars. Books like Backward Masking Unmasked, Dancing with Demons claimed rock groups are using backmasking to convey satanic and drug-related messages to the subconscious. And in April of 1988, a lawsuit was brought against Ozzy Osbourne and CBS, claiming the subliminal messages of the song Suicide Solution contributed to the death by suicide of Michael Waller. Judge Juris Fitzpatrick dismissed the case in 1991 because there was no evidence there was subliminal messaging in the song. However, he wrote, the court is convinced that the presence of a subliminal message whose surreptitious nature makes it more akin to false and misleading commercial speech and other forms of speech extremely limited in their social value would relegate the music containing such to a class worthy of little, if any, First Amendment constitutional protection. So saying that if there was actually subliminal messaging in your album, you were not protected by the First Amendment. Interesting, right? So in 1990, Judas Priest was sued over a suicide pact made by two men. The suit included the allegation that their song contained backward messages, including fuck the Lord, fuck all of you, which infiltrated the young men's minds. And just to be clear, there is no credible evidence to support the effectiveness of subliminal messaging. Wilson Bryan Key was one of the major proponents of the widespread but mistaken belief in that power, and he testified in the Judas Priest trial, and he also authored a number of books on this subject. Here is an example of one of his arguments. He posited that subliminal sexual imagery included in a Playboy magazine advertisement which depicted a naked woman made the ad more memorable. 95% of the men questioned a month later remembered the advertisement of a naked woman.
Yeah.
95% of the men remembered what was in the ad. Sure. I'm sure that had a lot to do with whatever subliminal was in there.
Right. Seems very scientific.
So that was, that's just some of his methodology, right? So the Judas Priest case was presided over by the district judge, Jerry Carr Whitehead, who ruled that because people are unable to protect themselves from the manipulative influence of subliminal messages, such messages violate an individual's right to privacy and are not protected by the First Amendment. So Judas Priest won the case after a month-long trial. Judge Whitehead stated that while subliminal and backmasked messages were present on certain songs, it was not clear that they were inserted intentionally by the band or the record label. There was also not enough evidence to prove subliminal. So who put them on there?
Yeah, I was like,
Satan. So there was also not enough evidence to prove subliminal messages affect behavior. However, Judge Whitehead didn't dismiss the case because, quote, it is unknown what future information, research, and technology will bring to this field of subliminals, unquote. Judas Priest members commented that if they wanted to insert subliminal commands in their music, messages leading to the deaths of their fans would be counterproductive, and they would prefer to insert the command, buy more of our records.
I mean, yeah, that's logical.
Again, the content of backwards messaging has not been shown to have any real influence in the listener, either consciously or unconsciously. Hearing phrases when a record is played backwards is most likely due to pareidolia, the human tendency to see patterns in randomness, and if we are told what to listen for, we are more likely to make that connection. Another theory is the observer expectancy effect, which is when you recognize something because it was pointed out to you. So when people play records backwards, and if they're not prompted about what to hear, they're not going to be able to tell you, like the Sweet Satan thing. If I did not tell you to hear Sweet Satan, you probably wouldn't come up with it on your own. But if I tell you that it's there, then you're more likely to go like, oh yeah, I completely hear that, and not be able to unhear it. So while the moral panic about rock and roll will never die out completely, the panic over backmasking did, largely because people stopped listening to records. Although many bands continue to put in backmask messaging because it's fun. My personal favorite example of this was when Bart joins a boy band and they have joined the Navy backwards. And then Lisa's like, wait a minute, I'm playing something, and then she hears it. So that's my favorite version of backmasking. That's what backmasking is and what they were doing here. And they were trying to raise Lucifer through their summoning